For example, he has pledged during the campaign and right after the campaign that he will arrest Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu if he steps foot in New York. He can't do that. The NYPD won't, even if they are ordered to do that, they won't carry it out. And I'm pretty sure the NYPD is not looking for a conflict with Bibi's personal security, right? And so he understands that limits, but he hasn't backed down from that pledge. And he says he will follow the law. Now, obviously, if he follows the law, he won't be able to arrest, but he still continues saying that. And so you don't see a moderation, but you see a person who understands that he's mayor of all the 9 million people in New York, and that includes more than a million Jews.
Hello everyone, my name is Frida Weisel, and I'm a New York City, Brooklyn-based Jewish YouTuber with an interest in all things Jewish, subcultures, religion, New York City, and human interest stories. New York City recently got a new mayor, Zohran Mamdani. A lot of Jews have a lot of feelings about him, especially considering his positions being what I think is fair to describe as anti-Israel. Whenever I bring up Mamdani, I see very strong reactions from Jews, and so I think it would be valuable to hear from the Hasidic journalist who covers the Mamdani beat. Jacob Kornbluh is a Borough Park Hasidic Jew with no formal journalism training who now writes for the secular newspaper The Jewish Daily Forward and was recently profiled by the New York Times. I'm looking forward to talking to him today about what he sees being so up close to both Mamdani and the Jewish community. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank those of you who are channel members and help make this work possible. I publish videos early for channel members, but all videos get published for all eventually. I appreciate all of you members, subscribers, viewers, and common participants for helping make this work possible. Thank you. And thank you, Jacob, for being here.
It's my pleasure.
Okay, so how long have you been covering the Mamdani beat?
Well, ever since the New York City mayoral election kicked off sometime in September or October of 2024. You had obviously Eric Adams was then engulfed in sort of a scandal that derailed any chances for re-election. Andrew Cuomo was mulling around. And it's interesting because I was covering Mamdani as a legislator, right, in Albany, where he introduced this controversial bill, Not on Our Dime, which some of the Jewish members described it as anti-Semitic. And so I was following his journey.
Can you explain what that was?
It's a bill that is targeting mainly New York non-for-profits that are backing or offering financial assistance to Israeli communities in the West Bank, Israeli settlements. It was later amended also after the Gaza war. It was sort of broadened to also penalize those who support groups who want the resettlement of Jews in Gaza and IDF activities. So you can include among those non-for-profits, the UJA Federation of New York that sends, assistance to IDF soldiers and so on. So there was a lot of backlash. The Assembly Speaker and the head of the Senate said at the time, they told me at the time it was dead on arrival. He only had like 4 or 5 co-sponsors, mostly Democratic Socialists. But it was an interesting topic because it was relevant to my work, and I was also following him closely during the war in Gaza. And so when he launched his campaign for mayor, he was just on my beat to watch out for, what would later become sort of a rising star. I started sort of seeing the sort of some indication. First, Andrew Cuomo was a very controversial figure, but even in the Jewish community, right, where he officially sort of launched his campaign around Jewish issues, saying anti-Semitism is the most important issue in this election. And obviously Eric Adams, who had support mostly among Hasidic voting blocks and Orthodox voters, didn't go anywhere, right? And so there was this distrust in Andrew Cuomo because of his handling of the COVID era restrictions. And, his focus on Israel doesn't necessarily translate in sort of meaningful actions that, Jews in New York could sort of relate other than support for Israel. So you started seeing Brad Lander, Scott Stringer, 2 Jewish candidates who were running for mayor. Obviously, I was monitoring them. They didn't gain any traction. And he was this dynamic speaker, a good communicator. I met him first in April, beginning of April, when he was already moving to top tier, second or third place. And he came then with one aide to a diner in the Upper West Side. Nobody stopped him on the street, obviously, and nobody interrupted other than one person, one student of Columbia University who recognized him, I guess, from media, stopped to say that they support him. Nobody really interacted and engaged with him. A week before, I was told that he did a press conference in Albany and his aide was trying to get reporters to cover. And in the end, they had to do just an on camera statement because nobody was willing to take their time to cover him. And so I saw, the seeds of what later became his rise. And obviously, him winning the primary put him in a position where Jews who vote Democratic down the ballot was starting to either consider him or they understood that, he's going to win and so on.
What was your first impression of him as a person and as a politician?
Well, as a politician, obviously, he's very immersed in the issues. He knows. I remember my first interview with him, it was actually over chicken soup in a diner in the Upper West Side. Not surprising, right? And we began talking, and, I'm 10 years older than him. So it was a little weird, interviewing this young candidate who knows to charm those he interacts with, very well aware of the issues. In some way, it was easier for me to do that interview because when it comes to my coverage of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, right, many New York politicians don't necessarily know. They know supporting Israel, if it's an arms embargo or a ceasefire in terms of protesting Israel. If it's supporting Israel, they talk about, either their visits to Israel or Israel being of a Jewish state, but they're not very well aware of the conflict, and he is. He obviously in college he founded the Students for Justice for Palestine, and when I asked him about reaching out, about his interactions with Jewish voters or reaching out to Jewish voters, he immediately, like so naturally, came up with a conversation that he had with an elder, a Jewish voter, after appearing at a candidate forum that was held in Bet Jeshurun. It wasn't obviously a Jewish related candidate forum, but was held there. And he was like, this guy came up to me and said, I agree with you on everything, including affordability and so forth, except for Israel, but I'm still voting for you because at the top of my mind is senior healthcare, affordability, and so on. And just at the time, there was a poll, a Siena poll, if I'm not mistaken, that came out that, what the top issues are for New York City voters. And there's a tab there at the crosstabs of Jewish voters. And it showed that the top issues even for Jewish voters was housing, affordability, and obviously, discrimination, which some could sort of a broader word, which you can translate into combating anti-Semitism. And so even for Jewish voters, they buy my message, right?
That was what he thought.
Yeah.
He thought that he's already got the Jewish vote like on his side to some degree.
He understood that he has his limits. Even now as mayor, he understands that he has a limits. He's not even trying necessarily to change his positions, as you see for him declining to outright condemn globalized intifada chants, other than saying that he'd never used it and he'd discourage others to use it. You see him saying he would support a divestment of the debt securities into Israel, although the comptroller says that this benefits New Yorkers. So he's not necessarily doing anything that would bring him closer to the minds of what the mainstream Jewish voters, especially those who Israel is very important for them. But he didn't try. Like, he was saying that, this is my message. It's resonating with young voters and with Jews who think that this city should be affordable. And it happened to be he ran against a flawed candidate. He ran against Cuomo the first time and then against Cuomo the second time, and he beat them. It's not like, it's also interesting because historically the Jewish vote is a very influential in mayoral elections and citywide elections. It didn't happen this time. A lot of Jews supported him, mainly, progressive, liberal, young Jews. just because he was the Democratic nominee and he ran against Andrew Cuomo.
So what was your impression of him besides for his views on Jews? Like as a person,
Oh,
personality wise?
he's a very good communicator. He appears as humble, not as a big shot, not as a politician who stands here and other people stand there. He was just very fluent in the issues, in most of the issues that I asked him about, obviously Jewish related issues. He also very, when it came to the hard questions, right, about BDS, about his pushing that not on our dime bill or his view on the Gaza war, he was unapologetic, but it didn't come across as defensive or antagonizing. Like it sort of was like, this is my position, deep held positions. I don't think it matters for somebody who's running for mayor of New York, although at the time and even now, he has said that BDS, in 2021, he said BDS should be a local issue. And as mayor, he's actually, doing that. But he didn't come across as somebody who wants to stick a fork in our eyes or be defensive about his deep held positions.
One more question I have about Mamdani before I want to ask you some question in a different direction. Just a question about his personality. What was I going to ask? Yeah. One of the things that bothers a lot of people is his place of privilege and yet taking on all of these everyday working class people persona. Was that something that played into your reading of who he is as a person?
No, he doesn't talk like an elitist or doesn't appear as, somebody that comes from a rich family. Or again, I remember covering him as a legislator and at the time as well. Like he came across as an everyday New Yorker.
Guy.
And again, he's charming. He knows how to communicate. Social media, his social media presence, understanding of social media, also his investment. He invested most of the money that they raised for the campaign in interacting with influencers or with people on social media, videos, viral videos. He's just good at that, and he managed to sort of appeal to a lot of people who are looking for somebody that would tackle the issues. There was a lot of suspicion then, and there's even suspicion now whether democratic socialists can actually govern in a city like New York, but he has sort of proven that he's able to communicate his message.
So what are you hearing from the Jewish voters? Is there fair? Because a lot of people feel that Mamdani is terrible for the Jews. What are you hearing are people so afraid of? And to which degree do you think it's legitimate?
I mean, the Jewish community in New York is very diverse. You have progressive Jews, younger Jews who are not very affiliated with, the broader mainstream Jewish organizations. They are mostly aligned with, Working Families Party and other social network or social justice groups. And obviously for them, what Mamdani is saying talks to them. He talks about local issues, which is important for everyday New Yorkers. And when it comes to anti-Semitism, he has reiterated his commitment time and again that he wants to protect Jewish New Yorkers, speaking out against anti-Semitism and investing in hate crime prevention. Now, again, when you take that and match it with his positions on Israel, that's where the conflict begins, right? How do you define anti Semitism when it comes to anti Zionist rhetoric? How do you find anti Semitism when it comes to targeting an Israeli business or a Jew carrying an Israeli flag or a Zionist owner of a shop where his, venue was targeted by vandalism, right? The protests outside Park East Synagogue and in Queens. That's where the conflict sort of broadens. And there are two reactions to that. One is those who say he's anti-Israel, he's a democratic socialist. We just can't, legitimize that, or we can't take this on. We oppose him, right? That's a democratic activity. You're in opposition. You're in opposition to a mayor. Not everybody supports the duly elected mayor of New York, as well as a lot of people don't support the president, or even in Israel, that they don't support the Israeli prime minister. You don't sort of, that's a part of the democratic process. But you also have that middle ground where there's unease, right? There's not fear. The fear belongs to those who Israel is very important to them. They can't accept that mayor of the largest in the city of the largest concentration of Jews outside of Israel, that the mayor says he will divest from profitable investments in Israel, or refuse to outright condemn globalized intifada, or being affiliated with a protest movement that some view as anti-Semitic, or his alliance with people who have said controversial and anti-Semitic statements present and in the past. But you have those liberal Jews who, for them, living in New York City means also affordable, public safety is important to them, and they have an emotional attachment to Israel. So they are uneasy about his positions because they're just not used to it. You look at the mayors going back 50, 60 years, they've all visited Israel, including David Dinkins, the first black mayor. And so for them, the fact that he won't march in the Israeli Day Parade, the fact that he says he will divest from Israel or refuse or delay his response to, the borderline anti-Semitic, anti-Israel rhetoric, so there you have a separation of people saying, this is him, he was elected mayor, what can we do, right? This is the mayor, we have to deal with it, we have to accept that we disagree on this issue, right? And then you have people who say, we are worried. We are worried. We're not opposed to Mamdani. We can sit down. We can have an open discussion about anything that affects everyday New Yorkers. But when it comes to Israel, we have a problem here.
Mm-hmm. I'm hearing myself from people more than just we are worried. I'm hearing he's maybe a fascist, he's maybe a communist, but besides for these very strong labels, I'm hearing he is very, very scary news for Jews. Now, we live in a world where people use very strong language, and we hear it from both sides, this language of for instance, this person is a Hitler or whatever it is. And I personally don't find that kind of language helpful in my own discussions about these things. But I'm hearing Jews be what I would describe as very, very concerned. It's not just, oh, this is not going to be in our best interest. There's a politician that's more for this issue than that issue, and we don't have the ideal delegate. There's a higher level of concern I'm hearing. Is that not what you're hearing?
Yeah, as I described, there's unease and there's deep concern.
Got it.
But, always have those people who say, for them, it's about labeling, right? If they are a Republican or a conservative or an Orthodox Jews that almost never vote for Democrats other than in municipal and local elections, for them, obviously, if you are anti-Zionist, anti-Israel, you're an anti-Semite and you're the worst person. And to be frank, for most people in the Jewish community that actually oppose Mamdani, they don't necessarily just oppose him because of Israel. They oppose him because he's a democratic socialist. They oppose him because he said he'll fight Trump. They oppose him because he wants to abolish ICE. They oppose him because he wants to tax the rich. There are a lot of reasons why to oppose Mamdani. It's not only about his position on Israel.
Can I ask what your own view, obviously, besides for being a journalist, which your role is to be as objective as possible, you're a citizen of the city. Have you yourself experienced intense concern about Mamdani's role as our mayor, as a Jewish constituent?
Again, I don't want to comment on my personal positions, not because I have anything to hide, obviously, but it's just not relevant to my work. But yeah, I mean, I'm a New Yorker. I love New York, and I'm a Zionist. And I love Israel. I feel an emotional attachment to Israel. I visit Israel almost every year. I have family in Israel. I care about the security of Israel. And so when the mayor participates in language that could damage the security of Israel, or participates in a protest, or refuses to immediately condemn certain activities that have to do with anti-Zionism, that is closely and directly anti-Semitic. It's a problem, but it's just not my job to either opine about it or have a certain position on him. But I attend most of his press conference. I have easy access to City Hall, and whenever there's a question that arises about his commitment to fighting anti-Semitism or certain positions on Israel, I'm there to ask him the question and give him the opportunity and the platform to explain himself and to clarify sometimes. That has happened in the past, and I'm sure it will happen going forward. We are just not used to it, right? We're not used to having a mayor. Even Bill de Blasio was a progressive who later on rejected AIPAC and started speaking like a majority of the younger progressive Democrats. He went to Israel. He was closely aligned, was on AIPAC stage. And so, he may have held positions that are closer to J Street, but he believed in a Jewish democratic state. Here we have a mayor who doesn't even believe that Israel should exist as a Jewish state, but as an equal state. And so, again, these are positions that we have never had a mayor hold such positions. And so it will be challenging going forward to see how that translates into actual policy.
Yeah. So you speak of young progressive views. Very often these views that you identify, social issues regarding immigration and various more left-leaning issues are associated with younger people. I wonder to which degree you might be experiencing that while you said Mamdani's rhetoric remains the same, he continues to talk, he hasn't stepped back from his original language. Do you think he himself, as he's maturing into a more senior political position, he is shifting to a more mainstream actual policy implementation? Are you seeing any indication of that?
No, I mean, so far we're not even 100 days into his administration. His focus has been on his campaign promises. Even when it comes to taxing the rich, he has a deep disagreement with the governor, not only about closing the deficit gap, but also about the commitment, like the promise that he made that he will tax the rich. He's been unapologetic about it, been pushing most of his policies that he talked about in campaign. And even when it comes to Jewish related issues, right? When it comes to fighting anti-Semitism, he's kept off the office to combat anti-Semitism, but appointed for executive director a progressive ally, somebody who doesn't necessarily agree with him on Israel, but is ready to take on being the liaison to the Jewish community and explain his positions and do the necessary outreach for him. If it's not implementing policy, it's at least having a seat at the table. I do not think that he will moderate per se. He won't necessarily become mainstream just because, number one, he was elected with a majority. He was overwhelmingly elected in the Democratic primary, and he sees himself as a leader of the Democratic Socialist movement and of possibly what comes next on the Democratic side and the future of the National Party. He sees himself as that leader. He's not going to compromise on what he thinks is policies that he can do, but he understands the limits, right? For example, he has pledged during the campaign and right after the campaign that he will arrest Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu if he steps foot in New York. He can't do that. The NYPD won't, even if they are ordered to do that, they won't carry it out. And I'm pretty sure the NYPD is not looking for a conflict with Bibi's personal security, right? And so he understands that limits, but he hasn't backed down from that pledge. And he says he will follow the law. Now, obviously, if he follows the law, he won't be able to arrest, but he still continues saying that. And so you don't see moderation, but you see a person who understands that he's mayor of all the 9 million people in New York, and that includes more than a million Jews.
He went to the Satmar Kovalev Kislev event, the huge, enormous events for both sects. How do you understand his fraternizing with groups that are so different from his values? He also met Trump. We often see him seem very chummy with people that are totally not aligned with what he says he stands for. How does that square with the person he is, and maybe where do you think he's coming from in like meeting the very conservative Hasidic community, and what is the person that interacts so comfortably with those that he claims to disagree very much with?
Well, first of all, when it comes to Satmar community, you know best that they are religiously anti-Zionist. They don't believe in the state of Israel, although they support the security of the people living in Israel. But he understands that for them, it's not necessarily a litmus test. It's not an issue that they care about, even though personally, if you'll ask Satmar Hasidim, I'm pretty sure many of them travel to Israel and are very pro-Israel. But again, this is a community, especially the Satmar sect, that their interaction with New York City mayors or with politicians, they make it clear that they have certain priorities that they want to focus on, and they want to get funding from the city for certain organizations, or when it comes to affordability, when it comes to housing, and so forth. And he appeals to that in not only in his meetings with these people, but also in his outreach. Right, when he gave out that flyer during the campaign in Yiddish, he spoke about that, right? He spoke about being a Muslim in New York and facing discrimination, and understands that Jews also face that discrimination. He doesn't necessarily talk about those who are targeted for, anti-Zionist activities, but he talks to the issues that many New Yorkers could feel that they have someone at City Hall who could work with them, and he doesn't shut the door. And just because you mentioned that, right, his appearance at Chofal of Kislev, he didn't have to do anything other than appear and wave his hand and shake the Rebbe's hand. How difficult is that? He didn't have to rescind any policy. He didn't have to, say he regrets some of his remarks or takes back his positions, because that's all what they want, presence. And he was there and presented himself to that crowd. But in his day-to-day outreach to Orthodox Jews, yes, it's difficult. There are very difficult conversations, including on certain policy when it comes to public safety, not necessarily Israel, but there is an open door, and he appointed now a liaison, which I'm sure
What's her name? Remind me her name again.
Felisa Wisdom.
Right. Okay. And she was involved with Yafed, which is the organization that tried to force educational change in the Hasidic community.
Yeah, so her appointment obviously drew backlash and criticism, and some people will probably have a problem interacting with her specifically. But City Hall has said that under her leadership, they will appoint certain point persons to certain communities, including to the Orthodox community. So we can expect some announcement soon about the point person to the Hasidic community, which I'm sure won't have these past activism and positions on the Hasidic community.
It sounds to me like a giant empire of like a lot of bureaucracy, while reality is like apart from all of that, like a liaison of anti-Semitism. Like what are the, besides for defining anti-Semitism, which I know she spoke about how they're going to work on a definition of anti-Semitism, what actual difference can a liaison for anti-Semitism make in the day-to-day life for, let's say, a New Yorker like you, a Jewish New Yorker like you who's visibly Jewish?
Well, first of all, it's interacting with interagencies, with government agencies, right? If it's sending out memos to the Department of Transportation, if it's requests for funding for certain security measures, or to the OBM, if it's interacting with the NYPD on investigating hate crimes, if it's interacting with the State Human Rights Commission in determining which cases of discrimination are considered anti-Semitism. Those are all issues that you need a coordinator. You need someone that is focused on that day to day, and obviously advise the mayor when it comes to certain policies. Obviously hear the concerns of many Jewish New Yorkers, take that in consideration, and formulate a blueprint. If Wisdom has told me that she wants to work on a framework that is very similar to the Biden administration's national strategy to counter anti-Semitism, and hopes to reveal it by by Rosh Hashanah. So, these are all issues that you need one person that, number one, can interact with the community, number two, can have that day-to-day interaction with city agencies, but most important, somebody who understands the community. If they agree or disagree, that's sort of a question for people who want to legitimize that or interact with her. But if you have a seat at the table, you're actually able to raise your voice or your concern on certain issues.
What is your experience covering all of this? You speak to me, it seems, with a fair degree of neutrality about an issue that is very, very hot for a lot of people. What is your experience going back home, going to shul in Borough Park, interacting with people, going to weddings, when people feel so strongly about your area of coverage?
I mean, again, I spoke to the New York Times about that it's an experience that is challenging. Obviously, you come to shul and you engage with a lot of people who have, you know, opinions about everything happening, including the removal of the snow or
So
even fracking. Even they don't understand necessarily the issue, they will oppose or support a certain candidate
so if you're
based on
davening, let's
that.
say someone comes up to you and says, "What are you doing?" Something like that. Why are you supporting, or what's going on with the snow? Like that you
Well,
become like,
to be clear, I don't talk in the middle of davening.
of
You
course, I
know,
didn't mean to insinuate.
you're talking about conversations outside in the lobby or during Kiddush. And yes, even the past week, I had a, you know, disagreement with a number of people who have different positions on Mamdani. And again, I'm not here to defend him or to explain him. I'm just here to lay down what I know about my interaction with City Hall, my understanding of his positions, and sometimes just enjoy the fact because I started that when I got married and I came to shul and there was no social media back at the time. This was sort of my parliament where I had what George Bush did with the Iraq War or whatever happened at the time in the city, and we debated it, we discussed it, and that was sort of our sport. Uh, and I've never felt not welcome in a certain community or in especially at my congregation because of what I write or the profession that I hold. People understand that I'm a journalist and that is my profession and that I do my job, honorably. But like people have different positions. Some are ready to engage. Some just want me to hear them out or prove me that I'm pro Mamdani and I'm a socialist, a liberal, doesn't care about Israel. But that's fine. That's society.
Can we talk a little bit about you? You're actually British originally?
Yes, so you can hear on my accent that it's sort of Yinglish, but also very British. And I say that because I have manners and I don't act or talk like a New Yorker. And I don't want to offend anyone, but I'm very proud of being brought up in Stamford Hill in London.
Uh-huh. The Bells
Yeah,
sect.
yes.
Do you have any kind of special connection to the Bells Rebbe since you're in between worlds?
Sure. Every time I visit Israel, I go to the Belzer Rebbe's davening and Tish. And when I have to make decisions about certain things in my life or with my family, I send in a request for a brocha or for a blessing or for consultation. He's my spiritual leader. He's my rabbi.
Does he know you?
He has more than 10,000 followers, so he doesn't necessarily. But, we know that number one, when you belong to a Hasidic sect, you're usually affiliated with the sect. You send your kids, in the community, they know about you, and we hold very high of our grand rabbi, and we understand that even though he doesn't ask me questions about my work or interact with me, we understand that he knows about you and he scans you through when you walk past and when you go in for kvittel. You understand that he sort of understands who is standing in front of him.
How would you say Bells is different from other groups?
They're not necessarily different. The one thing I would say in terms of sort of most of the work that I do as well is that the Belzer Rebbe is very moderate when it comes into sort of people, taking a profession, for parnasa, for work.
Livelihood.
If it comes to the issue that is now on the table, the IDF recruitment for Haredim, he's very much in favor of a law that would allow Haredim, although not necessarily yeshiva students, but those who are married already, to enter a program that is sort of handled by the IDF, but you get some degree and compensation for your work. He's very moderate in that. Other than that, when it comes to religious issues, there's not necessarily a difference, but every Hasidus has their own approach and way.
And it's not as anti-Zionist as other groups, or it's fairly Zionist.
Well, again, the emotional attachment or the view of Israel that we have is very different than the view of Zionists, right? The Zionists believe that the creation of the state of Israel is sort of the dream or the what we have prayed for so many years. We still every day pray for Mashiach, for the building of the temple. That is the Eretz Yisrael that was promised to us. So in terms of how we view, and I'm talking generally, not personally me, but how Hasidus views the state of Israel, is there is a government right now in Israel. We pay our taxes, we participate in the democratic process, and therefore we have to accept that. Other than that, we obviously live in a region surrounded by enemies, and the state of Israel protects them, but they don't ascribe to the dream of Zionism. The Belzer Rebbe doesn't always go and participate in the elections, go to vote, although he advises and orders his followers to do that. But in recent elections where it was very close and it was very important to show that the leader who people follow, actually takes this very serious, he went out and voted. So he's not necessarily anti-Zionist, but I would say we don't believe in the dream of Zionism, which is that the creation of Israel is the good that we waited for the Jewish people.
That makes sense. What led you to leave the UK and come to New York?
Well, I got married here.
Ah.
And I had
Which
two
year?
brothers here. When I learned in yeshiva in Israel, there were a lot of yeshiva students who I became very close with, who lived in New York. So it was sort of natural for me. But also because when you belong to a certain sect, it's sort of worldwide. And so even you leave someplace, you leave your parents' home, and you come to a different country, you still belong to the same sect, and you go to the same congregation. You just make your own friends and, establish yourself here. I like New York. I'm not anti-New York, right? I'm an American.
With our manners and all?
Again, that's challenging, but I try to meet every challenge. But I like it here in New York. I like that my family, my kids are growing up in New York. I feel safe here in New York. I don't feel discriminated against. And I understand that we can practice our religion the way we want in this country. It's fine. I go to visit my parents, but I'm not looking back. I'm not looking to emigrate back to the UK.
Which year did you come?
2001. It was 2 months after 9/11.
Oh, what are your original memories of settling here? Like what New York was like in comparison to Stamford Hill, besides for the manners.
It's a very different community. Stamford Hill is a very close-knit community. I would, put that in the same category as Williamsburg or as Kiryas Joel. Like, you still, in Borough Park, you're very independent, right? There's no Rav that controls the community in Borough Park. There's many Hasidic sects. Everybody has their own approach and own way. You obviously, the most important thing that you have an Erev here. and you don't have that in London.
Ah, ah. Was that a huge change for you
Yes,
to be able to carry on
it was
Shabbos? What did you
welcoming.
carry?
It was welcoming. Obviously, you can, if once you have kids, you can walk with a carriage to
You can
Shield.
leave the house with a big.
You
Oh,
can walk with your talus in your hand. You don't have to put it on before you go to Shield. You can carry a watch or certain things in your pocket that you can do in London. But
all of this is only Shabbos
well, it's Shabbos, but it's sort of
once a
refreshing
week.
that you can, for me, I think that when I came to New York, it was about that time that the Eruv was implemented a few years before. There was still a dispute. I remember walking in Williamsburg and getting shouted at for walking with a carriage, but you don't hear that anymore, in today's world.
Interesting. The Erev is still in dispute in Williamsburg, but I don't think anyone gets shouted at. Yeah, yeah. That's an interesting first memory. I thought you were going to say something about waiting in a line and no one being in the line.
Also, the snow. We don't have snow in London, so it was
What?
sort of, yeah. I mean, some
Little
snow
bits?
once in 5 years, a half an
Uh-huh.
inch, a few centimeters, but not snow. Although, again, 2 feet snow is also not good. But I don't own a car, so I'm I'm okay.
Are you a
with it.
subway rider?
Yes.
Okay, me too. I love the subway. So do you share the complaints about the snow issue this winter, that we had piles of snow everywhere?
I mean, I saw it because I was walking in the street to work, to the train. It was challenging for me, but also seeing the pileups outside of at the bus stops, or people triple parking on middle of the street just because there was no parking. But again, I asked the mayor about it, and he said that it was due to the frigid weather, because it was so cold that they had to redirect all city agencies to focus either on the homeless or on on getting people warm or dealing with that crisis. So it was challenging, obviously, but again, those are the concerns that I hear when I go to shul every day, especially on Shabbos. And if there's some controversy, you better believe it that I get it.
During COVID, you especially had a controversial position, right? Can you talk about what happened? Because even now, I asked my viewers what they want me to ask you about, and several people wanted me to ask you about your position during COVID times. You want to talk about that?
I don't want to relitigate it just because we have passed that period. Again, I'm a journalist, and at the time I cared for the health of New York, but also in sort of communicate between city government and my community. And I understood at the time Mayor Bill de Blasio was not necessarily effective in both communicating his message and enforcing the regulations. And so my focus was, if you are ordering certain restrictions, why you're not enforcing them? If you understand that there's a problem in the community, where is the outreach? Where is the communications? There was no flyers in Yiddish until August, September. I remember there was a city truck that was going around with a message about COVID or vaccines. I'm pretty sure it was about vaccines. Where I didn't see it in Borough Park or hear about it that it was in Williamsburg. It was actually roaming the streets of Queens. Most of Queens, there's a big Orthodox community, but not like Hasidic Yiddish speakers there. So
it was Yiddish flyers?
No, it was
a Yiddish
a truck with a message
with
in
Yiddish?
Yiddish.
Oh, that was in Queens?
Yeah. And so you could see how incompetent the government was at the time. Obviously, the leaders of the city made it a little more challenging because they singled out the Orthodox community. And so the Hasidic community, because we are so used to large gatherings, Tish every Shabbos or going to shul without masks, the fact that the mayor and the governor singled out the Jewish community just made it a more challenging work for me doing my job as a journalist. But again, it's not about myself. I'm not interested to talk about the attacks against me because I'm here still as a journalist and still doing my job and living in the community. But I understand there are some positions that are very deep held that people care about, people are concerned about. And this is a democracy. Everybody is allowed to voice their opinion, just not violating the law.
You know, at the time, you were very critical of how the Hasidic community was not abiding by COVID protocols. And a lot of people to this day seem to have like a schwere Herz, I don't know how to say it, who seem to be hurt towards you because of it. Do you feel that in your everyday life that is in the past and people now see you as like that doesn't define your relationship with a community?
I hope so, because it's not a relationship. I live the community. My kids are raised in this community. I intend to continue living in this community, and uh, my work as a journalist doesn't necessarily mean that I can go 3 times a day to shul and learn. In fact, yesterday I gave a drasha in shul that had to do with the parsha and about Shabbos. It had nothing to do with my job. I enjoy the Hasidic community. I enjoy being part of the community. And if someone was hurt at the time or is hurt by my work, I regret that. But I will continue to be honest and do my work ethically. And despite that, I am a member of the community, and I don't see myself as necessarily criticizing anyone or doing anything to hurt anyone, if it's on a personal level or on a community level.
Can I ask how many kids you have?
5.
Have you married them off any?
I married off my daughter, and then I have 2 Chassanim at home.
2?
Yeah, and I just came back from Israel. My oldest son got engaged
Mazel
to
tov.
someone in Israel, and then I'm marrying off my other son in Melbourne, Australia in the summer. So I will send out personal invitations to those who I want to participate in the simcha, but everybody's welcome to offer their best wishes.
Oh, sweet. Isn't the wedding going to be in Melbourne, Australia?
It is.
Okay, thank you for the invite to a wedding in Melbourne, Australia. I think everyone who watches this podcast is going to show up to the wedding.
Everybody's welcome. I can give you the date and the location, but I'm not providing any financial support.
I see, for the trip. Okay, I see. I think I'm about to wrap up, but I feel like it's important for me to ask, although I feel like I've got a very good idea of who you are. I think you were very forthcoming. I just want to ask you if you've experienced any threat to your place in the community because of your work you do. I feel like I need to ask this.
No.
No, or your children's marriage prospects.
No.
No. Has anyone like in your close orbit, like immediate family members, your spouse, your children, your parents said, "What are you doing? This is not a Hasidic guy's work. We're not journalists. This is an unusual path"?
No, I mean, it's unusual, but I am passionate about my work, and it's a career. People understand that this is what I like to do. I like to write, I like to report, and this is my parnassa. So it's not something that I'm looking to do just because it's a hobby or I'm passionate about, but this is my parnassa, and I understand that.
Did you find your Hasidic education where you didn't go to college, right? You never went to college. Your first language is Yiddish.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever attend any journalism classes?
No.
So do you find all of this to be limiting, or did you have to overcome something?
Yes, I had to overcome a lot of challenges, including writing proper English or shorter sentences. It was very challenging. And again, I came from London. In Stamford Hill, we had a 2-hour secular education every day. Was pretty effective. My parents, where I grew up in a house, we listened to the radio, and I read newspapers, read a lot of books, including the Little Medrash Says. I don't know if anyone in this, especially the younger, know about that, but it's sort of a book that I read in my childhood, and Rebbe Pesach Krohn's books in English. So I read a lot of English, but I couldn't write it. When I married, I was passionate about it, but didn't have the proper medium for it. And when I wanted to start writing and do it, I couldn't find a job because you don't have a diploma, right? You don't have a degree. And so I started on my own. I started a blog, started attending community events, started tweeting about it, started writing about it and submitting it to certain publications until I became better and better. Yes, sometimes you need an editor, as everyone needs. But I feel that it's, my experiencing in the job and being passionate about it helped me a lot. But it was very challenging. It wasn't ordinary. It wasn't usual. It took me a lot of time to come to a place where I am right now.
Do you feel resentment for that? Do you worry that your children will have to overcome such big hurdles as well?
No, I try to educate my children, and that they should understand that, when they marry, when they have to go into the workforce, that they know, but again, they know their limits because of our upbringing and our Hasidic community. But there's so many ways in today's world, including in the Hasidic community, where you can earn a degree, a diploma, a certain profession, but without going out from the community and even being married. I have a neighbors who learned law and became successful, joined
Lawyers.
prominent law firms. A lot of people who became doctors in the medical field. A lot of people who became architects and developers. There's a lot of to offer in this community, and again, it has to do with number one, passion and commitment, but also has to do with the mediums of how you deal with it. And in today's society and in the community today, there's a lot of both financial assistance, but also a lot of help with organizations helping out. I didn't have that back in the days.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. You were so forthcoming, and this was really interesting conversation. Do you think there's anything I should have spoken to that we didn't cover?
I can always do a follow-up.
Okay, great. You know
We
what?
can do
We'll
a Reddit
see.
conversation or any other
AMA.
mediums.
We can
But yeah,
make this into a call for questions if people have
of
questions
course.
for you.
And people could reach out personally to me either on Twitter or email, and I'm ready to hear anything that if I covered anything, if I addressed their concerns and their questions, and if not, I'm willing to engage or debate.
Wow, you seem to have very thick skin. I envy that. You just do your thing and you just let everyone's opinions roll off you.
That's how you survive.
That's how you survive in journalism world, I guess, and especially
in the world.
In the world. Well, I'm glad you're surviving and thriving, and you have a big hasanus and things coming up. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I guess I'm going to link whatever your forward profile in the video
Sure.
description so people can find you and find how to contact you and let you know what their opinions are.
Of course.
So yeah, thank you. And thank you also to all the viewers on YouTube and the podcast listeners as well. Bye-bye.